Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. Welcome to a LeadSquared webinar. Very warm welcome to those of you who've joined us for the very first time. We have webinars every week, so do look at our webinar calendar, and if there's something that interests you, you're most welcome to tune in. They are always free and they're always 1-hour sessions. So coming to the topic we are discussing today, it is on customer acquisition and engagement. And over the past couple of months, we've done quite a few sessions on customer acquisition and engagement, customer experience. But this time we will be focusing on the marketing side of things, and we have the perfect speaker to take us through that. But before I get into that, just a couple of points to remember. If you have questions, keep them coming. Put it on the chat option, the Q&A option that you have, and we will take them up towards the end of the session, or if Veda wants to take it during his presentation, we can do that as well. Some of the things that we will cover today are, of course, the state of inbound marketing in 2020, SEO strategies, content, social media, a little bit on PR, social posts, viral posts, and of course, buyer behavior and digital marketing best practices. So now Veda is the SME business head of Razorpay. So Veda is our speaker today. And Veda, if you could please talk about your 17 years of experience in the domain, a little bit about Razorpay, and anything else that you'd like to share with the audience today.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Shivani, and a very good afternoon to all of the attendees. I hope you're safe, whichever part of the country, whichever part of the world you are in. Very excited to be here. A big thank you to Team LeadSquared and to Shivani for inviting me for this conversation. As Shivani mentioned, I take care of the SMB business practice at Razorpay, both marketing and sales. I've previously been a CMO for multiple e-commerce companies. I also serve as a visiting faculty member in marketing at quite a few top e-schools in the country, including a few IIMs, Bangalore, Indore, Kashipur, and also serve as a marketing mentor with various startup acceleration programs, including multiple Thai chapters, Thai Chennai, Thai Kerala, quite a few other Thai chapters, Atal Innovation Mission with the Government of India, a few other entrepreneurship cells with a few B schools. So today what we're going to be doing is, over the next 40-45 minutes or so, what we'll do is we'll look at the great Indian digital story, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. It's a story that's been beaten to death, but something that went by with, in a very unnoticed fashion, kind of slipped below the radar. A very key milestone, a very strong epochal moment. That's something that we look at that happened during during the year 2019, and what are the implications of that particular milestone to startups and to SMBs overall in terms of their customer acquisition strategy. We'll also give to break this out into a couple of different ways. One is from a customer acquisition lens, and the second is more from an engagement, a lead engagement perspective. And I often, as I said, I mentor a lot of startup acceleration programs, and one of the consistent asks that keeps coming through from a lot of entrepreneurs, from a lot of marketers that I speak with, traditional marketers, a lot of founders, is there are two. One is they want to understand, in the post-COVID new normal, how do you continue to acquire and engage customers? That is one. The second ask is, people still feel pretty intimidated by this entire aspect of building a digital presence, by this entire aspect of digital marketing. It kind of intimidates them. A lot of these jargons and terminologies which are thrown at them, it kind of intimidates them. Which is why what I will try and do, basis my experience, I'll try to crystallize and provide you some frameworks on the basis of which you can decide for your business, which you might be running or where you're currently employed, where you're currently working as a marketing person, or say a company that you're running, what are some simple rules of thumb that you can use for you to make some decisions, right? Should I prioritize Facebook? Should I prioritize Google? Should I prioritize LinkedIn? What are some of those frameworks that you can adopt? And it's not either or, obviously. As an early stage company and as a marketer, your resources are limited in terms of time, in terms of money. So how do you prioritize the various marketing weapons which are part of your arsenal? That's something that we will look at. And something that's pretty close to my heart, we'll not just look at acquisition, but we'll also look at engagement. A few wise guys once said engagement is the next growth. So we'll talk about engagement. We'll look at a couple of caselets. I previously have led marketing for Healthify Me, which happens to be one of India's leading health tech apps. I used to lead marketing for Simply Learn, which happens to be one of the world's leading edtech companies. So we'll delve into experiences from both of these different brands in terms of from an acquisition and from an engagement perspective. We'll also look at the need for repeat business, right? So as part of your digital marketing strategy and as part of your overall business strategy, the need for repeats is paramount. And here we look at a couple of caselets. One, which was a failure in one of my earlier companies. We really couldn't crack the repeat piece of the jigsaw puzzle. We'll talk about what happened there. And then we'll talk about a success story as well in terms of how we went about cracking repeats. I hope you guys are excited and looking forward to the next 35-40 minutes. Before we dive right in, Shibani, I want to check, is everything all right? Audio, video, screen, the speed, is it okay?
So far, yes, we did lose you for a bit initially during the agenda, but I think you're back and everyone seems to be saying it's back now. So yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Great. Just give me, so great. So in case you have any issues, feel free to interrupt me, Shibani, if you're not able to hear me all right, etc.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. The great Indian digital story, most of us are aware right now, the number of internet users in India stands at close to 750 million. With close to 750, 800 number. This number 560 is a year dated. But one of the things that happened during the year 2019 was, for the first time ever, browser search was not the number one logical entry point for Indians looking to enter the digital web, right? Play Store became the number one entry point. That became the numero uno for the first time. So the majority of Indians were actually making their first time entry and discovering the digital web through the Play Store and no longer through the browser based Google search. And in India, if you look at it, Google essentially has a monopoly, if you think about it, right? So if you think about search engines in India, unlike a few other developed markets where there is at least some kind of a market share that a few search engines outside of Google still have, in India, the word search engine and Google is almost synonymous. But for the first time in 2019, Google search on the browser was no longer the first entry point for Indians. It was the Play Store, which also has a lot of ramifications and implications for a lot of entrepreneurs, for a lot of marketers, which essentially means you need to have a very strong app strategy. You need to have a very strong mobile marketing strategy. Both of these become very important. And we look at case studies and examples of both of these as we go along. I think somebody needs to go on mute. Shibani, I'm not sure if that's you. I'm getting some background noise.
I think
that's somebody's pet.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll take care of that. Sorry.
Sure. Oops. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay. Cool. You guys are able to see my screen, right? Shibani?
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So quick sneak peek into what we've been observing at Razorpay in terms of what have been some of the industry ripple effects, especially because of COVID. The months of March and April were particularly bad months, which goes without saying. But what we have seen during the months of May, June, and July is that the SMB, the startup ecosystem in India has seen a record breaking comeback, right? We've seen some all-time high months, not just in terms of new acquisitions of customers, but also in terms of businesses that have bounced back to life, which were previously assumed to have been shut down, which have actually bounced back. Various categories have seen a huge boom. E-commerce always was the number one category when it comes to embracing digital payments, but that's shown a very strong comeback during the months of May, June, and July. Few other categories that have grown, which is very intuitive as well, is we have been EdTech, health tech, IT SaaS companies, and gaming. Surprise, surprise. So a lot of these sectors, for very obvious reasons, especially because of remote work, social distancing, etc., all of these sectors have boomed. A couple of other very interesting data points that we have observed, which essentially points to the strength of the entire entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. Number one has been the fact that more and more businesses which are coming on board, they are essentially first-time users of digital payments. They're not users who are moving from one player to another, but these are people who are newly and freshly entering the ecosystem and using digital payments for the first time. That's a very encouraging sign for the ecosystem overall. The second is a lot of businesses are embracing digital payments very early on in their life cycle and not waiting for something which is further downstream. That's the second one. The third important point, which is also coming through, is the fact that we're seeing a lot of businesses come on board from tier 2, tier 3 and below. It's not just the Bangalore's, the Hyderabad's, Chennai, Mumbai's, and the Delhi's of the world. We're also seeing very strong businesses coming on board from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 and below, who are also servicing local consumer groups from their respective geographies, which points to the strength of their business models. And as I said, we've seen some record-breaking months at Razorpay during the months of May, June, and July in terms of adoption of payment gateway, adoption of Razorpay X, neo banking offering, payment links, etc. But what has been interesting is that this growth has not just been in terms of newer businesses that have come on board, just in terms of volume, but also in terms of the volume, the sheer absolute volume of monies that they've actually processed through the Razorpay ecosystem, right? The actual amount of money, the volume of money that they are pulling through the Razorpay ecosystem, that is actually moving upwards as well, which again points to the fact that these are not fly-by-night operators. These are not flaky businesses. These startups and SMEs who are coming on board are essentially businesses with very strong fundamentals and a very strong business model, right? With PMF, product market fit, having been established. These are the kind of businesses which are coming on board. Again, some very strong lead indicators as we crystal ball gaze towards the rest of the year, which are pointing to a very healthy and a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. Shifting track slightly, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some core startup engines from a digital marketing perspective. If you are a marketer, or if you are running a startup of your own, if you're an entrepreneur or you are a marketer, what are some of the core digital marketing playbooks that will work for you? And more importantly, from an acquisition perspective, what kind of frameworks can you adopt for prioritizing between all of these three, right? I'm sure all of these terms need no introduction, but let me just spend 30 seconds in possibly just dumping this down a little bit. SEM refers to search engine marketing, which of course is when you're searching for something on Google. Just like a physical auction that happens in the real world, you've got a virtual or a digital auction that's happening, except instead of bidding on a product in the real world, people are bidding on that particular keyword. Now, anybody which comes up, anybody who bids the highest, for all practical purposes, just for simplicity's sake, usually the guy who bids the highest, the advertiser who bids the highest, gets the opportunity to serve the ad the first. So all of those advertisements, essentially all of the efforts that you as a marketer, you as an entrepreneur undertake to make sure your ad is placed on top or gets an opportunity to be featured on top, is referred to as search engine marketing, and this is paid. So as and when a prospect clicks on that ad, you pay Google. You as a business, you end up paying Google money. SEO refers to all of your merit-based organic listings, which are listed below the advertisements, which are completely free, for which you do not have to pay any money for. And all of the efforts that go into making sure that your content is fresh, it's relevant, your page loads really quickly, it's mobile optimized, you've got the right kind of tags, you've got the right kind of meta tags fitted in your content, you have all of the right backlinks from authoritative sources coming in, all of the efforts that you undertake to make sure that you give your landing page and your home page the best possible chance to rank higher on Google's organic rankings is referred to as search engine optimization, or SEO. And of course, Facebook advertising needs no introduction. Now, if you are a marketer, and if you are an entrepreneur, and you are confused on what you need to prioritize, right? How do you decide which is your number one marketing channel, right? What needs to be a number one? What needs to be a P0 focus? How do you do that? One way is figure out if you are operating in a category which is mass or niche. Are you possibly maybe a polka dotted fish, which has something unique, which is living in a really large pond? Or are you maybe a fish which is operating in a very small lake with very few competitors around? So for example, let's say you're selling t-shirts online, you're operating in a category which is fairly mass. But let's say you're selling sherwanis online, you're operating in a category which is fairly niche, at least when it comes to the internet space. Now, there are two ways in which you can answer this question. One is the subjective way, the gut-based way. You as a marketer, you as an entrepreneur, have a very strong gut-based instinct on whether the category you operate in is mass or niche. You could go with that. In addition to that, you could also answer this in a more objective data back fashion, which is you just open up Keyword Planner, which is a free tool which is offered along with Google AdWords, and you search for the category that you operate in, and you look at the kind of latent keyword demand which is there for the category in which you operate in. Now, at least one rule of thumb that I have is any number which is beyond, say, 10,000 searches in a given month, at least from an Indian context, you could consider the category in which you operate in to be mass. Now, if you are operating in a mass category, what does that mean? It means there is already a lot of latent search demand. There is a lot of consumer demand, if not directly for your product, but at least for the category in which you are operating in, which consumers are searching for already on Google. So you as a brand can still have a very strong opportunity to piggyback on that entire demand which is already in place. Not all of us are Amazon. Not all of us would be able to create demand. But what you can do is you can piggyback on existing demand patterns which are already in place, right? So that's something for you to focus on. So if you're operating in a category which is fairly mass, then of course Google becomes your numero uno. That's something for you to consider. Now, if you're not operating, so essentially if you're operating in a mass category, then you certainly prioritize Google. But now, however, let's say you're not mass, you are niche. Let's say, for example, at Healthify Me, we were into health and fitness, where we were having digital calorie counting, providing digital health and fitness services, right? Nutritionist services, fitness trainer services, etc., which is a fairly niche space when it comes to India. So if you are operating in a niche space, it doesn't directly mean you go down to Facebook's lap, right? You also need to consider a couple of other things. If you are niche, which means if you're not necessarily mass, but if you're operating in a category which is, and if you're operating in a category which is high engagement, you can establish a very strong personal connect with the identity of the individual, and you as a marketer have the opportunity to inject a very strong visual element in your marketing communications, then you prioritize Facebook. Let me give you an example, and this is something that I will delve into, some further detail as we go along. At Healthify Me, when I first joined, I had a huge culture shock, right? Because for the first time ever, Facebook was the #1 breadwinning channel. It was working as a performance marketing, hard-working performance marketing channel, and it was working even better than Google for the first time ever. Because in all of my career thus far, I had always seen Facebook work more as a quote-unquote brand channel, and it hasn't really pulled its weight as a performance marketing, as a hard-hitting performance marketing channel. It was always Google which was the #1, but for the first time ever, Facebook was the #1, and it was primarily because of this, because the category in which we were operating in, which was around health and fitness and enabling people to discover a healthier and fitter version of themselves and enabling people to lose weight. It is something which is very close to the identity of an individual. It's something which strikes a very strong emotional resonance with your prospects. So which is why Facebook worked really well for us. And the other thing was, all of the communication that we did was testimonial led. It was all video led. It was testimonial led, where we had authentic stories being retold by our existing customers about the kind of transformation journeys that they have been through after using the application. So again, an opportunity to inject a very strong visual element, because all of these boxes were being checked. Niche, check. High engagement, check. Opportunity to inject a very strong visual element in communication, check. Because of all of these reasons, Facebook was actually working really well for us. Now, something you have to be cognizant of is, a lot of people confuse high engagement with high frequency of usage. They're not one and the same, right? Your application, your product could be used very frequently. For example, Ola is used extremely frequently. People use it, at least pre-COVID times, they used to use it at least 2-3 times a day, 30 times a month, 20 times a month, etc. Extremely high frequency of usage, but the relationship is extremely transactional. That's the nature of the category, right? It's a cab booking app. It's not high on engagement. Unlike, say, Healthify Me, where you are essentially talking about what workouts you did, how many calories you burned, you're talking about what kind of lifestyle diseases you have, you're engaging with the app to get personalized fitness advice. So it is high engagement. And if it is an extremely high frequency of usage and the relationship is extremely transactional, then again, Facebook is not going to work for you. That's something which is very important for you to remember. Now, the other end of the spectrum is your niche and you are low on engagement. Example here is Razorpay, for example. Razorpay operates in a category which is around payment gateway, right? We provide payment needs for businesses. We're not B2C, we're B2B. So we're not necessarily in the high engagement space, nor are we very mass, right? We're not mass for sure, unlike, say, online travel, for example, which was the case pre-COVID at least, which is extremely mass. So we do operate in a category which is very niche, and it is not as high on engagement as, say, a health tech could be, right? So then what you do is that we still create content not just on the keyword pools which are directly aligned to our business, which is payment gateway, which is say neo banking for RazorPayX, for paying out funds, for example, to your vendor partners, to your employees. We don't just create content around the categories in which we are directly operating in, because that per se has very limited existing user demand out there. What we do is we try to piggyback on larger keyword pools which are indirectly related to our business but have an overlap. Our demography still resonates with that particular larger keyword pool for which the catchment area is larger. So I go after those keyword pools as well, which in this case, which in RazorPay's case is entrepreneurship. What we're essentially selling to, whom we're essentially selling to, is entrepreneurs and business leaders, right? The key decision makers, and CFOs, HR heads, etc. So we create content around entrepreneurship, around deciphering this entire jigsaw puzzle of entrepreneurship, about growing your business, etc., which are not directly related to payments, but still indirectly related to payments, and but still speak to our consumer demography. Why do we do this? Because the keyword demand for that particular keyword universe is extremely large. So what we're doing is we have an indirect approach. So we focus a lot on SEO because we're operating in a niche space which is relatively lower on engagement. We focus a lot on SEO, search engine optimization, to make sure that we rank higher for larger keyword pools such as these, and then we generate leads from this larger keyword pool, which we then funnel back into our main business. That's something which can work. So I hope that framework was well understood. Essentially, very simplistically put, if you're operating in a mass space, focus on Google first, obviously. If you are not necessarily operating in a mass space, if you are niche, but you are high on engagement, and you have the opportunity to inject a very strong visual element in your communication, focus on Facebook. If you're operating in a niche space, but you are operating in a category which is fairly low on engagement, then you prioritize on SEO, where you go after some of the neighboring or tangential areas which are indirectly related to your business. That's something for you to focus on. Yep. Moving on further, let's do a quick sneak peek and do a quick caselet of Healthify Me in terms of what are the playbooks that actually work for us. Here, given the fact that Healthify Me was and still happens to be a mobile first and a mobile only company, the key elements that went into our entire mobile marketing recipe, the number one was Facebook. As I said, I had a culture shock when I first came in, where Facebook was the number one breadwinning channel for us. And I mentioned some of the reasons why Facebook was the number one channel a few minutes back. The other thing that did work well for us over a period of time was Google. To begin with, for example, around 2017 was the time when Google first introduced something called as UAC campaigns, Universal App Campaigns, which essentially becomes the only way to market, to drive installs. If you want to drive installs for your mobile app, if you're an app only company, Google Universal Ad Campaigns are the only way in which you can market using the Google network. There was a lot of resistance from advertisers when this was first launched in 2017. And the primary reason being, you're giving up all of your control as an advertiser to Google, right? You as an advertiser have a very limited role to play. You are giving up all of the control to Google, and you're giving Google a list of assets, and you're giving Google a list of your landing pages, and you're asking Google to go find the right kind of users to advertise to at the right time. And you're defining budgets. You're defining the sandbox for Google, but you're giving Google complete control and freedom in terms of how to market, whom to market, and when to market. That's how Universal App Campaigns work. Now, initially, when we first launched campaigns on Google through UAC, the results were very, very underwhelming, right? They were not good at all. And Google was a distant second to Facebook. But what ended up happening was, we did a very good job of instrumenting a lot of post-app install lifecycle events, right? So after somebody installs a Healthify Me app, what happens, right? They clock calories, right? They had breakfast today, they had an egg omelette today, for example. They clock that. They did 20 push-ups today. They clock their workout routines. They had water 5 times a day. They clock that, right? And then they start engaging with their nutritionists. They start engaging with the content that we put out on the app. They start visiting our pricing page. We have a freemium play, right? They start visiting our pricing page, which becomes another event. We have a lot of in-app interventions, for example, for specific targeted cohorts of users. For example, we have interventions where we offer a 7-day free trial, or we offer maybe a free diet consultation. Right, so anybody who chooses to accept a lot of these interventions, again, that's another event which is sent back to Google. Anybody who makes an actual purchase, right, which is the holy grail of all events, the most important downstream event of all, that event is again sent back to Google. So what we ended up doing was, let's say there are 10 people who have installed the app, out of whom 4 of them have gone on to perform a lot of these downstream events. What we asked Google to do is, now Google, find me 400 more who are clones of these 4. So we keep sending information back to Google. And what ends up happening is that Google's targeting accuracy and Google start getting better at finding these clones as you start sending it more and more data back. Right. So to begin with, Google's accuracy was all over the place because the data was not large. The volumes were not large. But over a period of time, and by this I mean over 6, 9, 12 months, what we ended up seeing was that as our volumes and the volume of information we were sending back to Google improved, our targeting accuracy, Google's targeting accuracy actually started improving. The other thing which is very important is App Store optimization, which essentially is SEO's cousin on the Play Store. Which is about making sure that your app's discoverability, both on the Google Play Store and on the Apple's iTunes Store, is high. From a keyword perspective, you have the right kind of keywords, long description, short description, etc., listed on your app's listing page. Plus, it is also about conversion rate. How do you make sure that you optimize for the creatives which are there on your landing page to maximize on the conversion rates, the number of people who view your listing to the number of people who actually click on the install button. So because we had a very strong focus on App Store optimization, what ended up happening was even during months and quarters where our marketing budgets were lower and we couldn't afford to spend a lot on marketing, we did not drop in scale because organic really started pulling its weight for us. In-app marketing, something that I mentioned. So what we ended up happening was we had something called as a lead score that we used to calculate for every single app install, which was basis a combination of several variables, right, including demographic variables. Is the guy from a tier 2 town versus a Mumbai or a Bangalore? Is the person using an iPhone or is the person using an Android? You have a certain score and a weightage attached to that. Is the person male or female? How old is the person? Is the person in their 20s or is the person in their 30s and 40s? Because what we've noticed is that the older the person, the more the unhealthier the person is usually, and the higher propensity that person has for picking up a paid offering, right? So all of this essentially goes into the lead score. And for those who have lead scores above a certain number, we have a lot of these in-app interventions, which could be your 7-day free trial, which could be your free diet subscription, free diet consultation, etc. That's something that we used. Email marketing, again, we had a whole host of life cycle drip email campaigns, something that I will talk about in detail subsequently. We also use AMP. AMP is a little bit of a 101 today in this day and age. AMP refers to accelerated mobile pages, which essentially is a simple architectural tweak that you can make on your landing page, front-end code mostly, which can ensure that your page, mobile site essentially loads very quickly. Earlier, when it was first launched, Google actually had a team which used to do this for free for startups. I don't think that team has been disbanded now, but this is something which is like a 101 that you certainly need to do to make sure that your mobile SEO rankings keep going up. Now let's shift track slightly. Before I do that, let me just see how we're doing on time. I think we're doing all right. I think we're kind of halfway through the entire presentation. I'll need another 15 minutes or so, 15-20 minutes or so. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on lead engagement and nurturing. And as most of you know, engagement nurturing is about doing, instead of trying to increase your top of the funnel, how do you make sure that people who are already part of your funnel, your marketing funnel, you've got traffic, you've got leads, you've got paying customers in your funnel, how do you work with the existing set of your existing pool, which is already a part of your funnel, and extract greater juice? How do you monetize them that much more? That's something that we will focus on. Now here again, as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, you would have this doubt as to how important is lead engagement and nurturing for your business, right? That's something which is very important for you to understand. Now, lead engagement and nurturing is not as important for every business. Now, here again, you can employ some kind of a framework which can help you decide how important or otherwise lead engagement and nurturing is. At the highest level possible, at the most philosophical level, lead engagement and nurturing is, the importance of lead engagement and nurturing is directly proportional to the number of questions your prospect has, right, at the highest level possible. So the greater the number of questions, the greater the need for engagement and nurturing. Now, if you're operating in a category like, say, e-commerce, for example, which is now well understood, most consumers understand it really well, the number of questions are going that much lesser, as opposed to if you're operating in, say, the edtech space, right, which is fairly nascent, or if you're in, say, in health tech, which is again fairly nascent, people are going to have so many more questions. So everything else being the same, for operating in a category which is more mature as opposed to being more nascent, then you're going to have a greater need for lead engagement and nurturing. The other thing is, everything else being the same, if your brand is extremely well known, it's credible, it's well trusted, it's well established, then again, your need for engagement and nurturing is going to be that much lesser. Your average selling price plays a big part. Now, the more expensive the product you're selling, for example, at Simply Learn, we used to sell our average selling prices about 12,000-15,000 and upwards, which is a pretty significant investment in the Indian context. As opposed to, let's say, you're selling products worth 400-500 rupees, which is fairly low. Then customers are going to have that much, that many lesser number of questions. So there's going to be a lesser need for engagement and nurturing. Your sales conversion cycle also plays a big part. Now, the longer your sales conversion life cycle, the greater is the need for lead engagement and nurturing. That's something, again, which you've got to realize, because if let's say your Domino's Pizza, your sales conversion cycle is 30 minutes, as opposed to, let's say, you're an Infosys, where your sales conversion cycles are, say, 18 months, 24 months, etc. By sales conversion cycle, what do I mean? The amount of time it takes on an average for somebody who becomes your prospect to actually end up becoming a paying customer. In Domino's Pizza's case, it probably is 30 minutes. In an Infosys case, it's probably upwards of 9 months, 12 months, 6 months, 18 months, right? So the longer, so everything else being the same, Infosys, for example, has a greater need for engagement and nurturing than Domino's does. B2B versus B2C again. And here I do admit I'm guilty of a little bit of stereotyping, because most of these boxes get checked if you are in the B2B space, which is why I've said everything else being the same. If you're selling to businesses, as opposed to you're selling to individual consumers, there is a greater need there for engagement and nurturing. Service versus product again, because if your service is having a very a material contribution to your overall value proposition as a brand, what that ends up meaning is that the human element plays a strong part, which means that the level of standardization which is available in your entire value proposition is lesser, which means consumers are going to have more questions. Let me give you an example. If you're buying a OnePlus phone, it doesn't matter why you're buying it from, whether an Amazon or a Flipkart, it's the same product, right? And the value proposition is all about the product. There's a very, very limited service component there. But let's say you're signing up for an online digital marketing course, or you're signing up for an online weight loss program. Each company defines this differently, right? If it's an online, Simply Learn defines it differently versus a Digital Vidya. If it's an online weight loss program, Upgrade defines it, your Healthify defines it differently, Squad defines it differently, all the other brands, all the other top brands, they define it differently. So consumers are going to have that many more questions, right? Because they want to talk to somebody from the sales team, and the sales cycle gets stretched out because there is so much variability in the offering. Service, which is the quality of the instructor, if it's in the edtech space, it's the quality of the fitness trainer or the nutritionist in the health tech place, that in the health tech space. All of these also play a very critical role in determining the quality of your entire value proposition. So everything else being the same, if you're operating in a space which is more service centric, you would have a greater need for lead engagement and nurturing. Point number 7, which is around level of standardization, is again linked to point number 6, which is around service versus product. Again, the greater the level of non-standardization, the greater the need for lead engagement and nurturing. I've just given you, so all of the efforts that you undertake to make sure that you can automate all of your touch points that you have with your prospects can be driven through something called as a marketing automation platform. Now, at Simply Learn, for example, as soon as somebody signs up for signs up as a lead, what would end up happening is that we used to send them a welcome email. 4-5 days after that, we used to send them another email which gives them information of the latest and greatest blogs. 4-5 days after that, we would send them an email which gives them a sense of maybe customer testimonials, or we would invite them to a webinar after that, 3-4 days after that. And then 3-4 days after that, we would send them an exclusive coupon code which expires in 48 hours, which gives them a 20% discount, right? So we had a series of automated emailers which were sent out at regular points in time to that prospect, which was customized, which was personalized. These are all called life cycle emailers, also referred to as drip life cycle emailers, very similar to water dripping off the tap, drip after drip. So the emailers go after one after another, and all of these are powered through marketing automation tools. Now, there are a lot of popular marketing automation tools out there in the world. I've mentioned a few popular ones, Acton, HubSpot. These are 2 very popular ones. But something that you've got to understand is that not all of these might be as cost effective, especially if you are, say, an early stage startup or an early stage company. So what some other names that I would recommend would be the likes of a Zoho, a Freshworks, and Active Campaigns. These should be some names which are more value for money. That's something for you to consider. Now there are 2 ways in which lead engagement and nurturing can help your business, right? We've spoken a lot about this. One is as part of the transaction lifecycle itself, you want to drive greater conversions. Now there's somebody who signed up on Simply Learn. How do I get that guy to convert? I have a 4 to 6 week sales life cycle at Simply Learn. How do I make sure that across this entire time frame, I give myself the best possible chance to get this person to convert? That's one way. The second is, let's say I'm Domino's Pizza, right? My sales life cycle is 30 minutes. Now, within that 30 minutes, it's extremely difficult for me through my email or SMS or my browser interventions to influence the conversion rate because the time window is very small. I just don't have enough time to play with. So what I can do though is Domino's knows that I'm a vegetarian who likes paneer topping, for example. So the next time I'm feeling lazy and I want to order pizza home, Domino's can make sure that Domino's is top of mind by sending me regular reminders in terms of what are some of their new offerings that they have, what are some of the new paneer topped vegetarian pizza offerings they have, for example. So lead engagement and nurturing in cases where your sales life cycle is extremely short. Case in point, Domino's Pizza, Make My Trip. Cases like these where there is an impulse purchase or the need is so very strong that there is not a very strong sales life cycle time window. In such cases, engagement and nurturing can work towards driving more brand loyalty, stickiness, and repeat business, and not necessarily for driving conversion as part of that transaction itself. The other way in which you can also help is refunneling users. So for example, at Simply Learn, we used to have this category of leads called as dead leads, which were essentially leads whom we had tried our best to convert, but who hadn't converted for whatever reason, and who had dropped out of the marketing funnel. So every 3, 6, 9 months down the line, we used to make an attempt at trying to get them to come back into the funnel so that we can try to monetize those leads. Now, all of those efforts at refunneling users back into your marketing funnel, that's another way in which you can look at lead engagement and nurturing, which can again improve your overall marketing ROI. Now, in pure business terms, how would you actually quantify the benefit that lead engagement and nurturing can bring, right? So, and by business terms, I mean top line and bottom line. So if you think about it, there are two very strong reasons. The first one is, I don't know about the organizations that you work in. Usually in most organizations, the CEO's favorite team is the sales team, because the CEO looks at the sales guys as the guys who bring in the money and the marketing guys as the guys who spend the money. And through lead engagement and nurturing, what you're essentially doing is you're enhancing the productivity and efficiency of your sales team. Now, let's say that you have a 2-member sales team, which can make possibly 20 calls a day. They work for 20 days a month, right? Which translates to 1,200 calls in a month. What 1,200? If it's a 2-member sales team, it's around 800 calls in a month, 2 into 20 into 20. Let's assume, for simplicity's sake, for the purpose of this example, let's assume that each call equals one unique prospect that the sales team is actually reaching out to. So which means your sales team has a capability, bandwidth, to reach out to just 800 people in a given month, unique prospects. But let's say your pipeline is 8,000 strong. How do you decide which are the top 800 from this 8,000 that your team needs to spend time on? A very unscientific way of doing it is last in, first out, whoever touched, or first in, first out, whichever works for you. But that's not very scientific. A more scientific way of doing it is through put your leads, put your prospects through a marketing lead engagement and nurture stream, and then look at their engagement on those emailers. And then you also score them basis their demographic variables. And then you come out with a weighted lead score that, like we did at Healthy Family, and we also used to do at Simply Learn. And basis that, the sales team, all they have to do is to sort it in descending order of lead score. And the top 800 are the ones they spend time with. So this has twin benefits. One is, of course, your sales team is now more productive, which means you're having a direct impact on top line. Their conversion rates are going up, which means your revenues are going up. The other advantage, which is also coming through because of this, is that you are not touching the remaining 7,200 who may not be as qualified. So you're not spamming the remaining 7,200 and thereby diluting your brand equity by going after people who are not quite ready. Right? These are the twin benefits. The other reason is, most of these engagement and nurturing efforts are done via email through a lot of these marketing automation tools, which are significantly, by a factor of almost 100, more cost effective than more expensive engagement and nurture techniques via Facebook or Google. So which essentially means your marketing efficiency is that much better, which means your marketing ROI or your cost of customer acquisition, the holy grail, the CAC metric, starts looking better. So which essentially means your bottom line improves as well. So these are the twin benefits. So you can improve your top line and your bottom line. Now, again, shifting track slightly. Before I do that, let me just do a quick time check. I think we're doing all right. The need for repeat business. I'll just talk about a couple of experiences that I've had with regards to repeat. One which was a failure, and the other one which was a successful turnaround story. And I'll talk about why it is so important for you to include repeats as an essential part of your marketing strategy. Something that saddens me a lot is that in this day and age, when companies think about marketing, they look at it from a customer acquisition first lens, and lead engagement and nurturing and the need for driving repeat business doesn't quite get the attention it deserves, which is why I would like to spend some time on this particular section. Now, a long time back, I used to take care of product management, and I used to take care of product and digital marketing for a online ethnic wear company, which used to sell Indian ethnic wear online. It used to, which is langas, kurtis, kurtas, sherwanis, etc. And they used to sell primarily to the Indian diaspora living abroad. Now, this was a healthy business with very strong business fundamentals, good EBITDAs, good gross margins, etc. But unlike a lot of other e-commerce companies in the country, but the problem was it had very low repeats. As you would imagine, right? Consumers used to come and buy maybe a $300, $400 lehenga for a Diwali or for a wedding, and then they used to disappear for a couple of years. The primary USP of the company was they not just provided ready-made garments, but they also provided a lot of bespoke customization solutions as well. This was primarily because you don't have access to high quality tailoring if you're living abroad. If you're living in a Detroit, if you're living in a Jersey City or in San Francisco, Toronto, usual NRI demographic hotspots, you don't have access to high quality Indian tailoring options, which is where the USP of this particular company came in, wherein they would actually customize the garments based on your requirements and they would ship it across to you. So as I said, very strong company, strong cash flows, everything, but very low repeats. So, but which essentially means that you have customers coming in through one door and they're leaving in through the other door. So you're always forever dependent on new acquisitions, because repeats had occupied a very small proportion of the overall volume of customers that you were attracting in any given month. And when we actually were looking to raise funds, venture capitalists actually found us to be extremely risky, because we were completely and totally dependent only on new acquisitions, not so much on repeats, which was a big problem. Unfortunately, we couldn't solve for it, which was the reason why, while the company is still doing well, it's still a stable company, etc., it could never quite achieve that hockey stick growth that most VC-funded startup actually look for. Having said that, we're going to talk about a success story of how we managed to turn around the entire, repeats part of the entire marketing jigsaw puzzle at SimplyLearn. And here again, the problem statement is very similar. SimplyLearn, again, a very strong company with very strong business fundamentals, but the problem was extremely low consumer repeats. We solved this in a slightly different fashion. And the reason for the low repeats is also intuitive, right? So if you've got somebody who's just spent, say, 12,000-15,000 rupees in learning a digital marketing course, how do you convince that person to again invest a similar quantum of money in taking up another course, right? It's going to be extremely difficult. So what we ended up doing was we pivoted our entire value proposition to say we're not just selling courses, but we're actually selling career paths and learning paths for prospects. And we instituted the concept of a learning path, wherein we said, you are here at the base of this mountain, and you need to take these 2-3 other courses to reach that aspirational peak, which if you say in the marketing track, which is say the CMO role, or if you are say the data science track, which is say the chief data scientist role, for you to reach that particular peak, this is the career path for you to take, and these are the 3-4 courses for you to take. So we were not just selling that one course, so it wasn't just a transactional relationship between the brand and the consumer, but we were selling the entire concept of the career path. That was something which was very interesting that we did. And we also launched a master's program, which was a premium offering that we launched, which was like 2-3x higher in terms of the average selling price. We specifically targeted existing users who had already taken a few courses at SimplyLearn with this particular communication, and this is something that really worked. And we also had specific repeat focused drip life cycle emailers which are instituted, and over 3 quarters we managed to move the needle on repeats from virtually nothing in terms of contribution, in terms of our customer acquisition contribution, to something which moved into double digits. This was all incremental growth that we actually drove through all of these different initiatives. That's all I had for you guys today. I hope that was useful. I'd love to hear any questions that you guys might have.
So Veda, quite a few questions coming in right now. So a question from Ebo, and just forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. He says, where will you place a real estate sales and rental agency, Facebook or Google? So essentially, I think which is the better channel for real estate sales and a rental agency?
Again, Ebo, what I would recommend is you look at the framework that I mentioned. Are you operating in a mass category or operating in a niche one? For the space that you have mentioned, I don't know from which country you are in, but regardless of that, I would imagine if it is real estate And if it is an agency for real estate, what is it exactly? It's pertaining to real estate. That's what I heard. So if it is pertaining to real estate, intuitively, pure first principles led thinking suggests to me that it needs to be mass. There is a lot of keyword demand. There should be a lot of existing keyword demand for it on Google, which is why I would go to Google first. Yeah, I would certainly prioritize Google over Facebook.
Okay. Ibo, if you have any other questions, follow-up questions, do ask. He has a second question before that, and he says, what would be examples of key neighboring SEO keywords to use for someone in the real estate sector?
No, for real estate, I don't think you need to get too creative, Rebo. I think even within real estate itself, you can find a lot of very, what do you say, very juicy keyword pools, which have a lot of keyword demand. Keyword demand, which is say localized by geography, keyword demand, which is say localized by consumer demography. You can have a lot of very exciting keyword demand patterns. I used to take care of marketing earlier for a travel tech company, and we had no dearth of SEO focused content or keyword pools, because the real estate is just real estate and travel both, right? Both of these have extremely exciting keyword pools, which you can certainly piggyback on, except in the case of Razorpay, where we had to get more creative, because we're operating in a very niche space at Razorpay. So we had to say, we can't just keep writing content on payment gateways and Razorpay X, which is on neo-banking and payouts, because the keyword demand there is way too small. So we need to look at larger catchment areas, which is why we also went after entrepreneurship. In your case, I don't think you have that problem. You're already operating in a space which is fairly mass. You just need to make sure you create right kind of content assets which can rank higher on Google.
Okay. I am moving to Raj's question, so it's pretty big. I will break it up for you. He says, hello, Ved and Shubhani. I am Raj Agarwal from NSH Knowledge Campus, Kolkata. I have two questions. One, as you said that Play Store has beaten browsers as an entry point, what kind of app can we offer to our TG students on the Play Store as an educational institute who offers residential courses only? That's the first one.
Interesting. So you were breaking up in between, Shibani, but from whatever I could glean, what you're asking for is, given that having a very strong app strategy is important in this day and age, what kind of apps should you look at if you're targeting students? I'm assuming that was the question, more or less. So that's an interesting question, Raj. I don't know which age group of students you're targeting for your app. I don't know if it's K1 to 5 or K6 to 12 or K9 to 12. So at least for example, I used to mentor a company called Playablo, which was in the which is in the edtech space, which was essentially going after the K1 to 5 segment, and they wanted to provide a gamified learning solution wherein they actually make learning fun. Very similar to the space that Byju's has also got into now in partnership with Disney. So that is a space that we actually wanted to get into, where fun was the primary anchor, and that's what we wanted to use. Now, what ended up happening was that, given that we were bootstrapped and we were not extremely VC funded, etc., going just down the B2C route is going to be extremely difficult. And I think that's also something that you would uncover as you get to grow your own startup. That if you are bootstrapped, which I imagine you are, I apologize if you aren't, if you're already funded, but I'm just assuming they're bootstrapped, going just down the B2C route is going to be extremely difficult. So if you are having an app which is, say, directly targeted towards students, having a very strong gamification element in the app is essential in order to drive student engagement. But B2C alone, purely in terms of the viability of your business model, it's going to be a very difficult nut for you to crack, which is why what I would do if I were you is I would hedge my bets and also have a very strong B2B focus, where I also sell to schools directly, which I know has longer gestation periods and longer sales cycles, but that is something which you're kind of de-risking your business, because B2C, it's very cash guzzling. It's not going to be easy for you for an early stage bootstrap company to actually grow on the B2C route. So that's something for you to consider. And if you do want to go down the B2C route, also consider growth through communities. That's something which is very important. So if you are in the K1 to K9, possibly even the K12 space, you're not selling to students, right? You're essentially selling to the parents of the kids, because they are the key decision makers. So you've also got to make sure that you also have a very strong community-led playbook for growth. That is also something which is very essential. It can't just be advertising-led. I hope that helps, Shubhani and Raj.
Sure, Raj. Okay, so he did.
Shubhani, I can't hear you. Hello.
Is this better?
Yeah, better. Please go ahead.
All right, all right. So, yeah, so you responded saying our TG age group is 16 to 24. All right, so I am moving to the second part of his question, which he says in a recent report by Adobe, it said that Facebook is more popular among 30 plus age groups, and YouTube is and Insta are more popular among the 15 to 30, which definitely contains our TG 16 to 24. Hence, which social media platform should we focus on more, according to you?
In your case, I would imagine Facebook would be a platform which should be more useful. If it is in the 16 to 24 space, you could possibly directly advertise to kids, but you can't target people who are 18 below 18 on Facebook directly, which is a little bit of through advertising efforts, which is a little bit of a problem. So if the majority of your TG is above 18, so if you're going after college kids, so to speak, or college students, then it's okay. You could still use Facebook. If it is below 18, then you're better off targeting the parents.
All right. Okay. Now, Shundipon has a question. He says, how a B2B cloud service provider, how can a B2B cloud service provider, how can they do lead management more efficiently? Any tools that you might recommend?
Oh yeah, there are a bunch of tools. Of course, there are. So you've got to understand there are two kinds of tools, right? There is a CRM tool, and you've got your marketing automation tool. Both of these tools need to be able to talk to each other. The CRM tool is used by the sales team. The marketing automation tool is used by the marketing team. As I mentioned earlier, the marketing automation tool is the one that powers all of your lead engagement and nurture efforts, and that essentially improves. And this feeds data back to your CRM tool. So before the sales guy picks up the phone and gives a call back, the sales guy has complete context on the lead, and he or she knows what are all of the marketing communication that that particular lead has seen before they actually place that call. So as far as your prospect is concerned, they have a very seamless, holistic experience that you are providing to them as a brand. So in terms of marketing automation recommendations, I had given a few recommendations earlier. Apart from the logos that were put up on the slide, which are more expensive, for an early stage company, I would recommend Zoho or an Active Campaigns. These would be two recommendations, or a Freshworks.
All right. There are quite a few questions coming in. Veda, if you want, you could just share a LinkedIn profile or something where people can reach out to you in case we can't address something now. But I'm just going to go on to the next one. It's from Deepika, who says, can you tell me how effectively I can optimize my blog, as I am getting traffic on blog, but the engagement is very low? High bounce rate and low page views is one of the main problems.
That's an interesting question. It's always something which is very difficult to optimize for. In terms of bounce rate itself, try to see if you can slice and dice it. And try to see if there is a particular channel which is contributing to the high bounce rate, or if there are specific content types which are pointing to the high bounce rate. Try to see if you can break down this larger problem statement into smaller boxes, which you can then solve for, because this larger problem statement is very difficult for you to solve for as a whole. So try to see if there is, say, Facebook which is contributing to high bounce rate, or let's say that the bounce rate is constant across marketing channels, but it is only a particular type of content which is the culprit, right? Try to see which is the culprit there. Once you solve for that, and let's say, and by the way, I don't know what is your definition of high bounce, but usually for blogs, globally, even the best of the best blogs, you pick up any global benchmark when it comes to B2B, when it comes to content marketing, even the best of the best blogs have bounce rates upwards of 50%, right? So if your bounce rate is, say, around the 50, around, say, 60-65% mark, you don't need to necessarily beat yourself up, because that is usually the kind of bounce rate that most marketers have to grapple with when it comes to blogs. This is specific to blogs. I'm not talking about campaign landing pages, by the way. I'm just specifically talking about content blogs. Now, having said that, you also want to monetize all of the traffic that you're getting on your blog, right? You want to possibly, funnel them into a lead pool, for example, which is probably an email list, etc. But for example, we went through this entire learning curve at Simply Learn, where initially, when we first had a pop-up intervention that used to come for anybody who used to land on the blog, our bounce rate skyrocketed, right? Then what we ended up doing was we increased the time lag when that pop-up intervention was actually coming through. From 5 seconds, it used to come up immediately, which was pretty irritating, as you would imagine. So people used to bounce. So we then increased the time lag from 5 to 15. Then we slowly kept on increasing it till we reached a point, which was 45 seconds, where the bounce rate was no different from what it was in the absence of a pop-up. So we knew that at that particular point, we had reached that inflection point, which was the time delay, which was 45 seconds in this case, where we were able to generate business value without compromising on user experience. right? So you could certainly use, do testing and A/B testing like this to figure out how you can monetize your blog further while optimizing for bounce rate and customer experience.
All right. I see some questions on property management services. I believe you covered some of that earlier, Veda, but if you want to throw some light on it, the question is essentially, are there any, what digital marketing strategies would you recommend for property management services in the current scenario?
Again, it's pretty similar to, I don't know what exactly is the niche that you operate in, but the answer that I gave to the other gentleman who asked that question on real estate, I think that similar answer would apply here as well.
Okay, I'm moving to Ramesh's question. He says, what would be your recommended platform for gamified learning?
That's an interesting one, because as I said, I used to mentor a company which was in the gamified learning space, which was in the K5 space, K1 to K5. So you were essentially selling to kids who are the age group of 6 to 10. So we were selling to the parents of the kids, and that's always a tough one for you to crack. So for the parents, again, this is a very niche space, right? So because there are not too many people who are actually searching for this on Google. So you've got, but this is something where you can inject a very strong visual element in communication, which essentially means that Facebook can be a pretty good channel for you. Followed by, of course, YouTube and a strong focus on SEO, but you've got to focus on allied keyword pools. So if you're in the gamified learning space, you talk about learning in general, or you talk about new age learning. Gamified learning, there's going to be no keyword volume, right? So you talk about other surrogates or other keyword pools which are kind of neighboring to the exact category in which you operate in order to garner interest and leads. I hope that helps.
Okay, I'm moving to Rohit's question. He says, for a pharmaceutical company, I understand. Okay, if I understand, comes in niche and target customers, our audience, our doctors. Where do they prioritize? What should they prioritize rather?
You are a pharma company which is selling to consumers,
Doctor.
which is selling to doctors primarily.
Yes,
So if you're
that
operating in the
targets
B2B space, yeah, so if you're operating in the B2B space or somewhere which is closer to B2B, then LinkedIn is something which is very important. But not in your case, which is doctors. Doctors necessarily, not a lot of doctors would be on LinkedIn. So in your case, I would recommend a more omni-channel approach and not just a digital-centric approach for you to go after and engage and acquire customers. I think you need to have a more event-led coupled with digital marketing, right? That kind of a more omni-channel approach. So for example, at Simply Learn, we were selling to working professionals who spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn was in fact the #1 breadwinning channel, even above Google. Or if you're operating in the B2B space, at Healthy Family, we also had a lot of corporate wellness programs where we were selling to CHROs, directors of HR and above, who are the key decision makers. So there, LinkedIn was the #1 channel for the B2B practice. So if it's B2B, in principle, LinkedIn should work better, except for certain demographic segments like say doctors, or if you're selling to schools, very few school principals on LinkedIn. Doctors, certainly more doctors than school principals, but I'm not very sure. I don't think there are too many doctors on LinkedIn. So which is why I would recommend a more omni-channel approach.
right. Okay. I'm moving to Janet's question. She says, we have launched a new product that is aimed at school leavers in South Africa. Facebook, I think, would be the best, but what would you suggest?
School leavers. So you want essentially teenagers, preteens who drop out of school. You want them to come back. I'm assuming that is the question. So there you are marketing not just to the preteens and the teens, but I assume you're also marketing to the parents of these children. In which case, yes, Facebook should work fairly well. Yes.
All right. I'm moving to Nischal's question. Nischal, hi. Good to see you here. His question is, any one major hindrance you faced, if any, during your journey with Healthify with regards to customer acquisition?
I think the biggest one is inertia, right? Customer inertia, which essentially, so Healthify has a freemium play, right? Wherein the free play essentially is the calorie counting aspect, wherein Healthify has the world's largest database of Indian foods, right, which are mapped. So any given Indian food, regardless of whether you're from the remotest parts of the country, any given Indian exotic local cuisine, any food that you have, Healthify has calories mapped against that particular food, depending on the quantum of servings that you've actually taken inside your body. So which was the entire free pool. So we had a very strong magnet which attracted a lot of free users to the app. The challenge was the inertia that the users faced in order to gravitate towards the paid offering, because the touch and feel barrier was a lot. That was something which was a problem. We solved that through multiple ways, but one of the ways in which we solved that was we lowered the bar for entry when we also launched our virtual nutritionist offering, wherein we offered RIA, which is a completely there is no human coach that you have. You only have a virtual nutritionist who is your diet and fitness planner, right? And obviously, because of the fact that there are significantly lesser overheads now involved, you can also offer this at a significant price discount, which essentially lowers your bar for adoption from a lot of consumer cohorts, which was one way in which we solved that entire inertia problem. I hope that helps, Nishal.
Okay. Yeah, we do have over 10 questions left, so I hope you're okay with time, or just we can always connect offline. But I'm just moving on to the next question very quickly.
Could
Abhijit's
we do that,
question, he
Astha?
says,
Astha, if I may recommend, we can take possibly a couple of more questions, and I could leave my email ID with you. You have my email ID anyway, contactveda@gmail.com. I can just type it out in the chat window. Anybody has further questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think I'll share my LinkedIn link and my email ID, and then the remaining 8 questions can be taken up separately, if that works.
absolutely, because I keep seeing the questions coming in and they're all posed to you, so it would really work for them to connect with you directly. So maybe I'll take one last question. That's Abhijit. He says, what is a CRO hypothesis and how do I develop one?
So you've got to start off with, so I'm assuming the question is, how do you optimize for conversion rate on any landing page that you create? How do you start off with a certain hypothesis which you then improve upon? Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can do this. I think one way in which I often like is I often take inspiration from benchmarks who are out there and from people who are already first movers and leaders in the industry I'm operating in. So I don't want to necessarily start from scratch. So what I do is I certainly look at other benchmarks of other brands who have done a really good job when it comes to conversion rate optimization, and other competitors in the space in which I directly operate in, who are already leaders in the space, who I know are doing a better job than me. So I certainly try to learn from them, and I try to get inspired by some of their hacks. That's something which I certainly start off with. And the other thing is to essentially A/B test and to keep looking at data. And you start off with some hypotheses which are, as I said, drawn from competitive intelligence and a strong understanding of your own consumer persona and pure first principles driven thinking. And you start off with some hypothesis, and if there are multiple hypotheses, you have A/B tests which run in parallel, and you let data decide. And that's the beauty of digital, right? You don't need to have subjective opinions on who's right and who's wrong. You can actually let data decide what works for you. So it doesn't have to be that what works for your competitors needs to necessarily work for you, but you can let data decide what is working. So you can have multiple things which happen. So for example, we had this debate quite often in my previous organization where the CEO particularly likes one of the competitors' landing page designs, for example, but you can't necessarily replicate that. So you let data decide. So you have an A/B test running, one which is a design which is inspired by what your competitors are offering, one which is more driven by first principles thinking in terms of what is actually working for you, and you let data decide what's working and what's not. I hope that helps.
Yes, Abhijit, let us know, but we are really out of time. So I took the liberty to share your LinkedIn profile with everyone here. And I will also share your email ID with those whose questions have not been answered. So feel free to reach out to Veda directly. So sorry, we could not take them up because they're just continuously coming and we will fall short of time. Thank you so much, Veda, for such a great session. And clearly the audience enjoyed it a lot as well, given all the feedback we got and all the questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Shivani, and a big thank you to all of the audience for coming in here and spending an hour of your day. Whichever part of the world you are in, stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. I hope to see you at another LeadSquared webinar. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay in touch.